Hey guys, this is Tyler here, and it is the end of May. I'm going to explain to everyone why it's best if you're dating in a country to stay with local people, to stick with the local women of that country, and avoid foreign people for dating. Obviously, this is kind of a message that's not applicable for many guys here, but there are some guys I know that do still date and even pursue relationships to some degree in the MGTOW sphere. So, what I've learned in the countries that I've lived, in South America, U.S., Russia, Estonia, is that in most cases, the domestic gals are better options when it comes to dating. And also, if you live in a foreign country, and a good way to tell if it's a good place, if you're one that really is into dating and relationships, is to look at how easy it is for a foreign guy and also domestic guy, but especially foreign guy, to get into a relationship with a local or domestic person or woman of that country. This is a really good tester, and you can kind of get a good idea of what it's like, the overall society, and you can see also how the political tendencies tend to be. So, like I noticed, for example, when I lived in Chile, many of the Chilean guys did not like to date Chilean gals. And it wasn't just based on physical attributes. In fact, it was often personal, internal attributes that many of them just did not like. They despised. And after myself spending 2 years down there, I saw what they meant by this. And I also started kind of developing kind of aversion to some of the attributes. There were definitely very beautiful women down there, but these internal attributes just over time really started disgusting me. And I started noticing this more and more. And this is a good tester also to see what the overall country's like. Now, when I lived in Russia, for example, most of the Russian guys absolutely will stick with Russian gals in relationships and marriage. And if you're a foreign guy, I always tell someone there's always a gal there in Russia for you. There's always someone out there. Russia is a very diverse, a very expansive empire kind of country, so it has just about everything, and you'll find something that suits you, your taste, and it's fantastic for this sense, for dating and relationships, and also, of course, all the other elements, the low taxes, the normal ways that still remain there compared to much of the European world. It's a fine place in this sense. Oftentimes, though, what happens is that if you live in a country where you're stuck with foreign gals, this is probably not a good situation. It demonstrates, it displays something about the country. It's also not very good if you're a single guy, and it also probably is reflective of how it is for the domestic guys of that population. I actually know of guys even in countries like Philippines and Thailand that prefer foreign gals. These are guys from like North America, from Europe, and they're living there, and I don't know why they would be living there. I mean, yeah, you can find a lot of foreign gals, but the thing is most of these gals are not like the great quality gals from their country. I've mentioned this before, that like most of the gals from like Russia and Ukraine that end up in the U.S. and Canada are usually not very good quality. Like the younger ones, these are not the kind that you'd want to end up with, because usually how it works is that you go westward, and as you go further and further westward, the quality goes down and down and down. This is usually the kind of the rule of thumb you can use. And this also applies to South America. For any of those guys living down in South America, most of the gals, like Russian, Ukrainians living like in Mexico or Latin America, I mean, this is on the same spheres like North America, probably really poor quality. And so you have to remember that, because I've known of guys, like I knew a guy when I lived in Chile, his name was Seba, but he absolutely adored the Russian women. A lot of Chilean guys do. And this guy had he had encountered a few Russian females in Chile, and we had spoken about this like 6 or 7 years ago, and I didn't know what I knew now at the time, but if I did, I would have said, okay, dude, these are not like your typical gals. Most normal gals of Chile or of Russia, Ukraine do not want to live in South America. More of them would choose North America, and then South America would be like last. It would be like, Europe, of course, would be ahead, and like Asia would. Latin America, South America would be really far down. So you always have to remember that. If you're having to concentrate on the foreign girls living there, those gals, like, this is one of the big reasons why I really urge guys, unless it's in certain situations, to avoid Middle Eastern countries, unless it's like Turkey, maybe Iran, if you have the right social circles, or if you're a Muslim guy, you could definitely do all right there. But in terms of like the overall Middle East, you go to countries like Qatar, Emirates, places like this, it's not really that, it's very unoptimal if you're not of that group, of that country. It's, if you're foreign, especially if you're like white foreigner from Europe, from North America, it's a huge issue. And in that case too, you're probably gonna have to focus on the foreign gals that are living there. And those foreign gals obviously are getting hit up by probably a lot of very well-paid foreign guys, and then also even domestic guys that are maybe pursuing these gals. So you have all these guys that you're then competing against, and just the overall society, the culture, and everything else you have to contend with. Because this is a huge thing that guys often neglect, is that you have to look at what the underlying system, the culture is in that country. Like, for example, I have an acquaintance, she lives in Russia, in St. Petersburg, she's from Russia, and honestly, like, okay, so she lived here in Estonia for like a year and a half, and then she went back to Russia to live, and she's about my age, and she was actually, before she left for Estonia, and then when she got back, I could tell she's a lot more pleasant, a lot more just friendly to talk to engage with, correspond with. And when she lived here, not so much like that. It was actually very, like, quite the opposite. I think this kind of illustrates to people that, because guys have asked me before, like, okay, could you bring like a Russian or a Ukrainian gal to Estonia and have them live? Yeah, you could. Unfortunately, though, how the culture is here, it's very westernized at this point. Even though I'm so close to Russia, it's quite different, and the respect just plummets. If, like, I've mentioned this also, that if I were living in North America or in Western Europe, I would absolutely stick with a girl of one of those countries. I would not date like a Russian or Ukrainian that was living, maybe if I was living in Germany, if I was living like in England, or definitely in the US and Canada, I would not date a Russian or Ukrainian gal, and 99% of the time. And I have many reasons for saying this. And over time, after you live somewhere, and I know guys can relate who have lived in Philippines, Thailand for 20 plus years, or even have lived in Japan, China, that you start seeing kind of there's big differences with the gals that have spent a lot of time in one of these Western countries, and also the type that go there. Because as we know too, women pick up the shape of the container of the country they live, so to speak. They are not like men. When men, like, after 16, 17 years old, they go to a country, they can still be very similar to how they were, where they came from. Whereas with women, it's not like that often. They pick up on the bad ways once they go there. Unless maybe if they're like 60 plus, they won't, but it's in most cases they would. And that's where the issue lies. And see, the problem I also explain is that there's not this exposure of the all the bad ways of these countries, of like North America, of Western Europe. These ways have not really saturated on the gal, so it's very strong, it's very potent, kind of like a narcotic when it hits the gal. This is just what happens. I mean, I knew a gal when I was in high school. She actually became very well known on the news. She was accused of, I won't say the term, PEDO. You can, that's abbreviation, PEDO. She was in the Heartland, and she basically was involved with a high school student, and she got arrested, got a felony, went to jail, and then now she has that on her record. But this is a woman, mind you, and she was not really exposed to to a lot of bad elements when she was growing up in Minnesota. And I suspect that after having, it really hit her hard when she got, say, to college. And you could see this. I mean, this was a very intelligent young woman, and she got, like, this totally kind of, it was very strong, as I said, very potent. And when she got into college, and then when she got out, she was sleeping around a lot. And then after, she then was messing around with this student. And I think someone maybe that would be less likely to be prone to that issue if they had just been around it like nonstop growing up. There would be more immunity, so to speak, to this. And this is the same illustration I give with Russian, Ukrainian gals that go to these places. Now, understandably, there are gals that mostly are career motivated, going to like US, Canada, Germany. But most of the time, in those cases, if it's like that, they probably will have a boyfriend or a husband back from their home country. And they may come with them, or they will come and then the person will join them eventually. That's kind of my experience, because it's just how it is. So, yeah, and I've always told this to people, like when I was living in Chicago, I lived outside Chicago, I only encountered like Russian, Ukrainians, like probably a few times that were under 30. And the very few, 3 or 4 gals I encountered, they were all married. And so there was one actually I met, she lived very close to where I lived. She was like 22. This was 4 years ago, I think. And very beautiful gal. She was married. So this wasn't a situation that would have worked. So, and don't think, some guys I know think that these gals will just like, jump ship. They'll just like screw around with you and cheat and stuff. They may, but in most cases they probably won't. And it's really often not even worth the effort either. Especially as a MGTOW guy, it often isn't worth the energy, and you can obviously have problems come along there if you try to initiate that. And so you got to remember this, because guys, so of course, going back, they discuss the possibilities of bringing a gal back to their country. Guys don't talk as much about what about like dating a gal of a foreign country, and that's living in the country you're living in. And much of the time, I think it's not the wisest ideal. There's cases where it can work, but unfortunately, when this happens too, it's probably in a country where you'll see this consistent trend where they don't respect men a lot. There's either a decent welfare state, there's a lot more preference given to women, there's a gender imbalance. It's not really a completely free society. If you run through these countries, it's this common situation. Too much diversity, and yes, there can be too much diversity. Any number of these things usually play into this, and And really, it doesn't make it a very optimal country in general for guys. And you got to remember that. If you're one that wants to live like in South America, Brazil, Argentina, best to stick with a gal that's from there. And trust me on this too. If anyone ever goes to Argentina or has lived there, they can testify. Argentine women are absolutely beautiful. Not all of them, but many of them. And it's just like if you go to Russia or Ukraine, you can usually spot an Argentine girl or a woman on the street from a foreign gal. It's dress, skin, how they, their overall look and how they carry themselves is quite different. Exactly the same way also in Russia. You will be able to spot a foreign gal very quickly. There's just things and see, in Russia it's kind of interesting here because a lot of gals that are Russian may have the same skin tone as the foreign girl that's coming there, but just how they act and how they carry themselves is different. Now, with that being said though, I will say, of the countries that I've lived in and traveled to, I did notice there were more girls in Russia, like foreign gals. They took very good care of themselves, and they, had a decent amount of respect for guys. They carried themselves with much better behavior, and I imagine it was because they were in St. Petersburg, Russia, and they knew they were surrounded by a lot of beautiful women. They weren't anything special, and this wasn't a country that pandered to them. And this was really interesting because I remember even when I was at a party back in 2019 with a friend of mine at the time, and there were 2 or 3 foreign gals, and one was very attractive from Western Europe, and she's very interested in me. Honestly, I probably could have taken her home. I already had a girlfriend at the time, a Russian girlfriend, but it was quite interesting, like, how she was towards me. I probably also because I just had a very laid back and tempered demeanor. I was not at all like desperate or anything. Anyone who's met me or who's gone out with me to clubs or anything in the past would know this. I'm not really desperate with gals. That's how I am. And that suits me well in those situations. But you see this situation and how it plays out. So the main point here is go to a country, stick with the domestic gals of that country, or probably be much happier. Pick a country with a good assortment. So that's my advice here.